In the dimly lit confines of a California prison cell, a revolutionary spirit blazed brighter than the sun. George Jackson, a tireless black activist, found himself immersed in the stark reality of incarceration until he was killed in 1971 by prison guards. Among the 99 books found in his cell, one title shone with a different kind of resilience: Enemy of the Sun, a collection of Palestinian resistance poetry by the gifted poet Samih al-Qasim. The collection has since circulated in Black Panther newspapers and other venues, but the question lingers etched in history. How did the verses of a Palestinian poet find their way into the hands of an African-American activist? Fast forward to today, to a world gripped by the escalating violence in Israel and Gaza. Black Lives Matter, a movement born out of the struggle for justice and equality, stands under a glaring spotlight. Reactions, or even the absence of them, from this movement and related groups in the United States have become a subject of intense scrutiny. Black Lives Matter Chicago, in a now-deleted post on X, seemingly celebrated a conflict thousands of miles away. The post featured a paraglider with the Palestinian flag and the words, "I stand with Palestine," even though the group later said it was not proud of the image, adding, "We stand with Palestine and the people who will do what they must to live free." It sparked outrage and soul-searching. Was it a gesture of solidarity or a statement beyond its intended message? Unknown to most people, what lies beneath these headlines are deeper connections, a web of history, solidarity, and a complex relationship that spans decades. In today's video, from the legendary Black Panthers to the Black Lives Matter movement, we'll delve deep into the depths of history and explore the voices that have amplified the call for justice. We'll uncover how internationalist Black freedom movements, scholars, and activists have opposed Israeli occupation for nearly 6 decades. From Malcolm X's critique of Zionism to his meetings with the Palestine Liberation Organization and marches for Palestinian rights, from reggae legends singing for Palestinian freedom, Muhammad Ali's refugee camp visit, to Nelson Mandela's profound words, we'll trace the history of the Black Palestine and Black Israeli relationships. Welcome to a journey through time, a journey that may challenge perceptions, spark conversations, and leave a lasting impression. Let's begin. Past relationships, a forgotten past. But before we explore the rich connections between these Africans and Palestinians, we need to rewind the tape to the 19th century when the story first began. Here, we explore what was the first cordial relationship between African Americans and the Israelis. For much of the 20th century, African American activists admired the Zionist cause as an allied struggle of another oppressed minority in the Western world. The participation of American Jews, who stood shoulder to shoulder with African Americans in the civil rights movement, solidified this support. For starters, Jewish figures like Michael Schwerner and Andrew Goodman, who were killed by the KKK in Mississippi in 1964 after registering Black voters, exemplify this unity. On top of that, Black nationalist thinkers and activists such as David Walker and Henry McNeil Turner drew profound inspiration from the ancient Exodus story in the Hebrew Bible. This tale of liberation, of a people in bondage in Egypt who resisted oppression and ultimately found their freedom, became a touchstone for African American politics and thought. The resonance was clear during the struggle for abolition in the United States, and it extended to visions of a potential homeland for the African diaspora. The idea of an oppressed people seeking a connection to their ancestral roots and the establishment of a political community mirrored many Black nationalist visions of self-determination based on land for Black people. Even Marcus Garvey saw a model in the emerging Zionist movement, and so did Webb Du Bois, one of his main antagonists. However, as history unfolded, some Black leaders started to express dissent. A change of heart, fading connections. The establishment of Israel in 1948 was celebrated by many corners of African American political life organizations, including the NAACP. At the time of the establishment, there was still much less awareness of African American communities, of the Nakba, and of the Palestinian dispossession that occurred as a result. You look at the black press, and there was virtually no mention of Arab dispossession. Instead, they identified with European Jews as an oppressed and dispossessed people who survived near extermination. Interestingly, Ralph Bunche, who was an African-American diplomat and the UN mediator who actually helped to negotiate the treaty between Egypt and Israel after the 1948 war, expressed a lot of reservations about how the establishment of Israel would dispossess Palestinian people. That same year, in 1948, over 700,000 Palestinians fled or were expelled from their homes. Malcolm X, one of the towering figures in the civil rights movement, was among the first black activists to speak out for the Palestine cause in the Arab-Israeli conflict. His journey, initially entangled with the Nation of Islam, evolved as he explored the complexities of the geopolitical situation. In a 1958 press conference covered by the New York Amsterdam News, Malcolm explained, "People of color in the U.S. would be completely in sympathy with the Arab cause. The only point is, they are not familiar with the true problems existing in the Middle East." His perspective started to shift the narrative. Malcolm X became a staunch opponent of Zionism. He famously polemicized against it in Zionist Logic, an article published in the Egyptian Gazette in 1964. In the document, Malcolm X notes the parallels between the subjugation of Palestinians and Africans. He pointed out the strategic value of Israel to world imperialism. He went into detail. The ever-scheming European imperialists wisely placed Israel where she could geographically divide the Arab world, infiltrate and sow the seed of discord among African leaders, and also divide the Africans against the Asians. We know the West deeper than it knows itself. Today's violence is a legacy of the British Empire's strategy to divide and rule, by which a small island of European colonizers used strife as a weapon to enhance their power. Colonies where people fought among themselves could be ruled from a distance, using relatively little force. Malcolm X's efforts, together with the 1956 Suez Crisis, marked crucial turning points. Black activists, already protesting the Vietnam War, saw Israel's conquest of Palestinian lands as an imperial parallel to the racialized violence African Americans faced. Organizations like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Black Panther Party supported Palestinian resistance as part of a joint struggle against racism, Zionism, and imperialism. That said, it was after the 1967 war that a different perspective became more visible. But hey, if you're enjoying this video so far, consider giving us a little love by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us and keeps our channel growing. Now, without further ado, let's continue. What is the 1967 Six-Day War? The year 1967 brought seismic shifts in the global landscape, and one of the pivotal events was the Six-Day War. This short but intense military conflict saw Israel taking control of the West Bank and Gaza, regions that were formerly under Jordanian and Egyptian authority, respectively. This particular moment in history captured the attention of black activists in the United States, who were already engaged in a tough struggle against racial injustice in the Vietnam War, condemning what they perceived as U.S. imperialism on a global scale. They recognized that to end oppression in the United States, they had to confront imperialism on a global scale, and Palestine stood at the forefront of this worldwide confrontation. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, emerged as a powerful pro-Palestinian voice in response to the 1967 war. They published a Palestine primer in their newsletter, framing the war as an act of colonial occupation and identifying Palestinians as integral to the broader global anti-colonial movement. Titled, "The Palestine Problem, Test Your Knowledge," the SNCC newsletter listed numbered bullet points describing Israel as an illegal state and Palestinian refugees as victims of Zionist, British, and U.S. aggression. It represented a reframing among Black Power activists of the Middle East conflict as part of a worldwide struggle against colonialism and imperialism. It became much easier not to see Israel as, the brave little republic farming in the desert, and instead see it in their view as a Western-sponsored interloper, a colonial settler state that had dispossessed a people of color. Simultaneously, the Black Panther Party voiced its support for the Palestinian resistance that emerged in the aftermath of the war. They portrayed al-Fatah and the Panthers as united in a joint struggle against racism, Zionism, and imperialism. To these groups, the African American struggle was seen through the lens of internal colonization, akin to the status of Third World peoples, which included Palestinians. Huey Newton, a leader of the BPP, emphasized, "We support the Palestinians' just struggle for liberation 100%. Intercommunalism, featuring Layla Caleb. As we approach 1970, the Black Panther Party, guided by the intellectual leadership of Huey Newton, embarked on a journey of ideological transformation. This new path was coined intercommunalism. It revolved around identifying a network of communal hubs across the globe, united in their struggle against the global system of white supremacy and colonial dominance. Remarkably, Palestine emerged as a pivotal node in this vision. The Panthers incorporated striking imagery into their narrative, notably featuring Layla Khaled, a fighter from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a symbol of fierce determination, wielding a gun. In the same year, 1970, a noteworthy appeal made its way into the New York Times, bearing the title, "An Appeal by Black Americans Against United States Support of the Zionist Government of Israel." This appeal was the brainchild of the Committee of Black Americans for Truth in the Middle East and garnered support from prominent Black revolutionary leaders, including James Boggs and Robert F. Williams. The appeal passionately conveyed the committee's unshakable solidarity with their Palestinian counterparts, who grappled daily with the burden of occupation. It concluded with a resolute demand: all military aid or assistance to Israel must cease. Imperialism and Zionism must exit the Middle East. We call for Afro-American solidarity with the Palestinian people's quest for national liberation and the reclamation of their stolen land. One cause, one people. How did local Palestine and African-American people in the United States make connections in their everyday lives during this period? The interactions between Black and Arab communities in the United States during this era are an often overlooked facet of this narrative. The Black Power movement, known for its geographical and ideological diversity, found a crucial focal point in the Detroit area. This region harbored one of the largest Arab-American communities, and within this landscape, Black gatherings thrived within the United Auto Workers. The League of Revolutionary Black Workers collaborated closely with Arab-American laborers in auto plants, forging meaningful connections. Inspired by their Black counterparts, Arab-American workers established an Arab Workers' Caucus in 1973, which later pressured their local union to divest from Israeli state bonds following the 1973 Yom Kippur War. So what was happening to Black and Jewish relations in the latter part of the 20th century? How did Black communities respond to Israel during that time? Amidst all these developments, the dynamics of Black and Jewish relations in the latter part of the 20th century underwent significant shifts. Notably, in 1979, UN ambassador and former civil rights leader Andrew Young faced immense pressure to resign following his covert meeting with a PLO representative. The ensuing media battles did not merely focus on declining Black-Jewish relations domestically. They also paved the way for a more pro-Palestinian perspective to find a place in the national discourse. During this time, James Baldwin, known for his outspoken views on Arab rights in Algeria and France, despite the associated risks, authored a piece titled Open Letter to the Born Again, published by The Nation in 1979. He wrote, "The State of Israel was not created for the salvation of the Jews. It was created for the salvation of the Western interests. The Palestinians have been paying for the British colonial policy of divide and rule and for Europe's guilty Christian conscience for more than 30 years." In this dynamic milieu of evolving perspectives, Reverend Jesse Jackson played a pivotal role. That same year, 1979, Reverend Jesse Jackson played a pivotal role and led a delegation to the Middle East after Andrew Young's resignation. During this trip, he engaged with both Israeli officials and PLO representatives, including Yasser Arafat. Jackson advocated for direct negotiations between the United States and the PLO, drawing parallels between the struggles of the Palestinians and African Americans. He remarked that both understood the cycles of terror and pain, suggesting that open dialogue might pave the way for reconciliation. Fast forward to 1988, and Jesse Jackson made a profound impact on American perceptions of the Israel-Palestine issue during his presidential campaign. Working in collaboration with the Arab American Institute, his campaign sought to pass resolutions endorsing a two-state solution at 11 state Democratic Party conventions. At the 1988 Democratic National Convention, Jackson's delegates distributed Palestinian flags and T-shirts as part of an effort to incorporate a similar platform into the party's agenda. Although the campaign eventually abandoned the platform fight, Jackson's unwavering commitment to the issue initiated what historian Nigel Pal Singh has referred to as the first significant U.S. public debate on the idea of a two-state solution in the Middle East. This shift in focus, emphasizing U.S. foreign policy, represented a tactical departure from the radical activism of the 1960s and 1970s. While previous efforts concentrated on building grassroots pressure, Jackson and Young sought to directly influence the policymaking process. Afro-Palestinians unapologetically exist. Afro-Palestinians indeed exist, although their visibility often arises in discussions of anti-Blackness. It's crucial to acknowledge this existence without invalidating their struggle, as some might do. In fact, prominent Burkina Bay leader Thomas Sankara, in his unapologetic manner, addressed the United Nations in 1984 and advocated for the Palestinian cause. It's important to highlight that numerous African nations gained their independence in the late 1950s, 60s, and 70s as they cast off the yoke of colonial rule. They identified the parallels between their own struggles and that of the Palestinians. Many Afro-Palestinians trace their roots to Muslims from countries like Nigeria, Mali, and Senegal, who had settled in Jerusalem for religious reasons. Others are descendants of those who fought alongside Arabs in the 1948 war and subsequent uprisings. Notably, Afro-Palestinians have played a significant role in the movement. One remarkable figure is Fatima Bernawi, an Afro-Palestinian of Nigerian descent who became the first female Palestinian political prisoner. She took a bold step by planting a bomb in a cinema in Jerusalem to protest a film celebrating the 1967 Israeli-Palestinian War. Palestinians and South Africans, together against apartheid. Drawing parallels between the Palestinian struggle and that of South Africans is not only valid but deeply resonant. South Africa, under the oppressive rule of the white minority government from 1948 until 1994, endured its own form of apartheid. The iconic Nelson Mandela, a former South African leader, affirmed his support for the Palestinian people, emphasizing that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. The similarities between the experiences of the Palestinian and South African people were apparent, and this solidarity continues to this day. Mandela's spirit lives on with his grandson, Mandla Mandela, participating in a pro-Palestine protest in Cape Town. In a symbol of international solidarity, a giant 20-foot statue of Nelson Mandela was inaugurated in the West Bank, gifted by the South African city of Johannesburg to Ramallah, the Palestinian political capital. The fight for freedom in the 21st century. 2006 witnessed Israel's war on Lebanon, and during this time, the world-renowned black writer Toni Morrison, along with 17 other influential intellectuals, issued a powerful statement condemning Israeli aggression. They refused to equivocate in the face of the demonization of Palestinian National Liberation Forces. Their statement underlined the enduring issue, asserting that the political aim behind the ongoing conflict was nothing less than the liquidation of the Palestinian nation. The year 2014 marked a poignant juxtaposition, with the Gaza war and the protests over Michael Brown's shooting in Ferguson, Missouri, occurring in close succession. Palestinians even took to Twitter to offer advice to the protesters on dealing with tear gas. Bassem Masri, one of the most vocal activists in Ferguson who tragically passed away in 2018, was of Palestinian-American heritage. The aftermath of the protests saw activists traveling to the occupied territories, and in 2015, black activists and leaders publicly declared their solidarity with Palestine. In 2017, 11 members of the Congressional Black Caucus co-sponsored Repair Betty McCollum's D-Min bill to prohibit U.S. aid to Israel from being used to detain Palestinian children. Newer black representatives whose campaigns were strengthened by Black Lives Matter organizing, including Ilhan Omar, Cori Bush, Ayanna Pressley, and Jamal Bowman, have taken more forceful pro-Palestinian stances than many of their CBC colleagues. This includes co-sponsoring a recent joint resolution disapproving of a $735 million U.S. arms sale to Israel. This confluence of activism highlights the evolving dynamics and continued relevance of the Palestinian cause in the fight for justice and equity. In the most recent developments of 2021, the resonance between the Palestinian cause and events in the United States became vividly apparent. Representative Cori Bush paid tribute to Bassem Masri, a Palestinian-American activist from St. Louis, in a moving speech on the House floor. Masri, who passed away in 2018, played a significant role in the protests in Ferguson, Missouri, following the death of Michael Brown in 2014. As Bush aptly put it, Bassem was one of us. He showed up ready. As a Palestinian, Masri was unwavering in his commitment to resist, rebel, and rise up alongside his fellow activists to fight against the militarized police occupations in their communities. Unfortunately, the spring of 2021 witnessed escalating violence in Israel and Palestine, which triggered a powerful sense of solidarity among many African Americans. Notable black public figures, including Brooklyn Nets point guard Kyrie Irving and actress Viola Davis, have been vocal in their support for the Palestinian cause. Black Lives Matter activists have played a pivotal role in organizing and promoting pro-Palestinian protests across the United States. A Black Lives Matter organizer in New Jersey succinctly captured the sentiment of the movement, stating, "We know occupation. we know colonization, we know police brutality. A shift in public opinion is also evident as highlighted by a February Gallup poll. The majority of Democrats now believe that the United States should exert more pressure on Israel than on the Palestinians to resolve the conflict. This marks the highest level of support for pressuring Israel since Gallup began tracking this question in 2007. This transformation can, in part, be attributed to the Black Lives Matter movement, which has encouraged Americans to view the Israel-Palestine situation through the lens of racial justice. This shift underscores the dynamic role of social justice movements in reshaping the conversation around international issues. Addressing Islamophobia and caution in Congress. It's important to clarify that the Palestinian movement is not solely a Muslim cause, as it encompasses a diverse array of backgrounds, including Christian, Jewish, and Druze Palestinians who are also impacted by the occupation. However, a disturbing trend exists in Western societies where Arab people, and by extension Palestinians, are often assumed to be Muslim. This association, though not inherently false, can lead to elements of Islamophobia in online discussions and, by extension, real-life attitudes. Some individuals may choose not to support the Palestinian cause, mistakenly believing it to be exclusively a Muslim concern. Angela Davis aptly expressed that the struggle of the Palestinian people serves as an inspiration for those everywhere fighting against racism and for freedom. It's vital to recognize that dismissing Palestine as solely a Muslim issue overlooks the detrimental impact of Islamophobic lobbying efforts that have aimed to vilify Palestinians as jihadis. Moreover, it's crucial to acknowledge that even Christians can be subject to Islamophobia, given the misconceptions that surround the Palestinian cause. Attempting to pit movements against each other, such as End SARS, Free Palestine, or Black Lives Matter, serves no constructive purpose. In reality, the individuals directly affected by these movements remain at risk of harm, brutality, and various forms of injustice. Solidarity among these movements can be a unifying force against oppression and discrimination. While former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney and former NYC Councilman Charles Barron have taken a stand in support of Palestine, there are relatively few Black elected officials who have followed suit. This can be attributed to the fact that maintaining Israel as a critical extension of U.S. power in the Middle East remains a strategic point of unity among the U.S. ruling class. Crossing this red line in Congress can risk an official's standing within the mainstream political landscape, and others have paid the price for doing so. For instance, in 2018, Mark Lamont Hill was removed from his role as a commentator at CNN after expressing solidarity with Palestinians. In Canada, just recently, Sarah Jama, a member of the provincial parliament for the Ontario New Democratic Party, was expelled from her party for advocating for a ceasefire and an end to the occupation of Palestinian land. These incidents underscore the challenges faced by those who dare to voice support for the Palestinian cause within the political and media spheres. Conclusion. Now, in 2023, it's unclear how the public, particularly Black public opinion, will react to the events of October, underlining the horrifying violence committed by Hamas against civilians or the incredibly violent Israeli attack on Gaza, which has been justified in terms that many activists and UN human rights experts have labeled as genocidal. As expected, the majority of the political elite, the Biden administration, and the mainstream media have sided with the Israeli state and provided mostly unconditional support for its response, including its most brutal manifestations. Although it is difficult to predict where public opinion will go, we believe that the shift in public opinion that occurred in 2020-21 is already having some impacts, as evidenced by the numerous large-scale rallies against the Israeli offensive that have already taken place, many of which have been led by Jewish Americans who are against the occupation. All of these discussions are challenging. They are a residue of the first divisions imposed by colonial powers. After all, authoritarian forces who have little regard for Jews, blacks, Muslims, or anybody who identifies as other find it easier to subjugate divided nations. We'll eventually have to get over the notion that the only ways to achieve safety and peace are through violence, overly generous military expenditures, armed police departments, and the forcible relocation of the other with no consequences. In the end, we'll have to get to fundamental human decency and respect. While we haven't arrived yet, we can still say we are not afraid to dream of such a reality. Thanks for watching. For more melanin-rich content, please subscribe to the channel.